Well, Duke, where the hell are we going today?
We're gonna go to Pinchabalio's record ranch.
Oh, Lord, not that asshole again. Bless his heart.
The same. Now get on your horse.
Astronaut swallow a fingernail clipping while they were asleep and didn't know about it. They got back down on the ground and said, hey, "Oh, I'm having problems, breathing." So they brought him in, and sure enough, they had swallowed or they had sucked in a nail clipping into their lungs, and they had to get an operation to get it removed.
Yikes.
Yeah, so zero G
Hey,
does
Michael.
wonderful things for you.
That's fascinating stuff, Paul.
So what's new with everybody?
I was just talking about space stuff.
Yeah. I was hoping to get out to California to meet with one of these manufacturers that does fiber optics in space. But the manufacturer decided to come to Houston and bring his hardware and do some demonstrations for us. And so when he came out, it kind of defeated the purpose for going out to California. But and I was hoping to hook up with Kevin during the trip.
Somewhere down the road.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, Michael, you didn't even give me a heads up. What are we talking about today?
Let's see. I had questions, Paul. If you had some questions, just kind of play. But my boss, the president of Hand Drawn, Kevin, he had a question for you.
Okay.
To get the rolling here, and his question was in regards to volume and lacquer cutting.
Mm-hmm.
He was curious about how time, speed of the record, and the type of music affects the volume, and how you control that when mastering.
That's a good question. It's a bunch of questions rolled into one, but yeah, I mean, basically the faster the disc's turning, 33 versus 45 consumes more space on the disc than 33 does by a factor of whatever it is, 35%, I think, something like that, which is the direct correlation between the two speeds. The general rule of thumb is that bass takes more space on the disc than treble. So the stuff that's going to be the most difficult to get on a record would be a loud rock record that's long. So it's a matter of if the time is pretty much fixed. I have no control over that. So if the side times are long and it has a lot of bass, generally the only thing you can do is reduce the volume until it fits on the disc. So it's sort of an iterative process.
Because if there's more bass and more volume, the grooves wiggle a lot more. Is that right?
Yeah, they wiggle side to side farther, and bass, as you go down in frequency, it takes more and more space. So that's why back in the day, a lot of records were filtered at 40 or even 55 hertz. Those are two common frequencies to get more level on the record. Now, it wasn't as big a deal back then because, a lot of speakers didn't go down that low back in those days. But with today's audiophile systems and subwoofers, you don't want to be losing bass just to get more volume on the record. So,
yeah.
Does that answer the question?
I think that does. That was
Okay.
It was similar to another question I had in regards to something I read. It was in a vinyl community group a few weeks ago. Somebody was also talking about 33 versus 45, mainly with reasons. Which one do you like better if there's a choice between 33 and 45? And this one guy was saying that he, as well as a lot of other people, like 45 RPM because they sound. And his comment was he believed it sounded better because the record's going faster. And I was trying to argue that it was volume. Is it true? Wow.
Yeah. It's just that you're spreading the wiggles out, so to speak, to make them easier to track. I'm not a big fan of 45 just because I don't like flipping the record over every 8 minutes. I find that annoying. I want to sit down and listen to music to relax. And that means I don't want to be jumping up and down and up and down, you know. I'm happy to sit there for 20 minutes for a side, you know, but and then flip it over for side two. But I find it a little, maybe it's just because I'm getting older, but I just find it a little annoying. And you know, there is a slight improvement in sound, no question about it. But I think 33 just sounds pretty swell just the way it is.
Yeah, along those same lines though. So, you know, it's really been kind of the trend the past decade or so to do audiophile reissues on 45 RPM. But do you recall the first time you really were asked to do some of those?
It was probably for Chad Kassem, you know, for acoustic sound stuff. Like when we did the A-Jazz series, I think that was all 45 RPM, as I recall. Which, you know, the Prestiges and you know, all the stuff from Concord, Prestige, Fantasy, yeah, all those different labels. Yeah, I mean, you know, I can remember 45 RPM kind of became a thing with M&K Records back in the mid 70s. They actually did some directed discs at 45 RPM.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's a viable, valid thing. I just, you know, when I'm playing records at home, it's not what I'm going to grab usually.
Did you cut a lot of 12-inch singles in the late 70s, 80s?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, I would say it was more in the 80s and 90s, but
Okay.
yeah, tons of that stuff, you know, both for rap and dance music.
Yeah, yeah.
And for, you know, for the jocks to play where they can scratch and, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to know that the speed does affect it, because I was just thinking, okay, well, you know, you've got fewer tracks on one side of the record, you've got more space to play with. Oh, you're just going to cut it a little bit hotter. So that's why it sounded.
That's valid too. I don't disagree with that, but interestingly though, I usually don't push the level on 45s. I make sure that it's at a good LP level, but I generally don't push it for 45s, because then you're kind of, you know, defeating the purpose of getting the better fidelity. So.
Well, I've always kind of wondered about that anyway, because there's some things I've got, like here's a hit song that's on, here's the album with the hit song on there, but somewhere along the way I picked up the 45 RPM single, and yeah, that's a lot louder, and it's, you know, it's got more guts to it. So I figured it's a little hotter.
One of the most outrageous 45 well, I think it was 45, maybe it was 33, but one of the most outrageous singles that I ever heard on 12-inch was Huey Lewis, The Power of Love, which was cut by George Horn up in San Francisco. And somebody gave it to me. And that is just an amazing example of, you know, what you could do with one song on a 12-inch disc. It just sounded incredible.
The running time when cutting an album, I know it's right around 20 minutes. Is that kind of the safety?
Well, it's a rule of thumb. Again, it depends on the program material. You know, folk is going to take less space than anything because it usually doesn't have a whole lot of bass, and jazz is kind of in the middle, and rock is at the other end of the extreme. So it depends on the music. But yeah, I try to tell people that the ideal side time is like 17 to 18 minutes, 16 to 18 minutes. But most people don't do that. You know, sides tend to be on the 20 to 22 minute side. I try to tell people to not go over 24, because the level comes down so far, you're going to be kind of in the noise floor, you know. When you play it back, you got to crank it up louder to make it sound good.
I was wondering about that, because there's came out in the late 70s, but it was a Hank Williams Sr. Greatest Hits album, 2 LPs called 40 Greatest Hits. You've got 10 tracks on each side of the record, so it's very cage hell in that sense.
Yeah.
But, side clocks in at 26 minutes, but then I'm kind of wondering, I don't know, I mean, they're mono. Would that affect? I mean,
yeah, that helps. Mono takes less space than stereo because there's no vertical modulation. It's all horizontal, so the grooves tend to be a little thinner, you know, for mono.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really annoys me about 90s original vinyl, because when you're getting in the CD era where you're pushing albums at 50 minutes and above, it seems like a lot of vinyl from that time, they were trying to press it on one disc, and it just doesn't sound that good to me.
Yeah. The first record I remember that really pushed the limit was what's his name? Hello, It's Me, and some of those songs. Todd Rundgren. He had that one album that had, I think it was, both sides were 30 minutes, and I actually had to cut that as a reissue, and that was a tough one to get on the record, and it's not real loud. You got to crank it. The tracks are
the album, but is there no breaks between the tracks? Is it just one?
No, I think he had spreads on there, and we made the narrowest ones that you can do on the lathe. But
Okay.
yeah, I cut it for, I think it was for Razor and Tie as a reissue.
Oh, I haven't heard of them in a long time.
Yeah, well, see, they got absorbed by Concord, so I think the label as a brand has kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
But the folks are still there.
So optimum side for a 45 RPM disc, is it about 10 minutes, 11 minutes?
Well, under 14 is what I tell
Under
people.
14? Okay.
Yeah. I think we pushed it. Let's see. Did we even do that? I remember Ron Rambach wanted to put out Dexter Gordon's One Flight Up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a single 18-minute side, and I got it on at a pretty decent level at 45, but I think for some reason he decided to pass on it anyway. So as a 45, maybe we redid it later when he started doing 33s. That could be.
That explains why that never came out on Music Matters.
Yeah. Well, but he did switch to 33s later on. So yeah.
And you did it for Cisco, right? On 30.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
And I've done it now. I think I've cut that I've cut that as much as any of the Blue Notes that I've done multiple times. I think I also did that for the Classics series, also recently, like in the last couple of years. Whether it's out yet or not, I don't remember. Right. Not supposed to divulge some of this stuff because of the lead times.
So I think it's been asked before. I mean, some of these Blue Notes you've cut several times, like Blue Train, for example.
Yep.
So I mean, have you taken any lessons learned from previous takes and said, oh no, I'll play it this one to this version that I'm going to cut?
Well, I think they're all relatively consistent. I might have made a couple of minor changes from cutting it, across the 4 or 5 times that I've cut it. But because we did that as a 33 for Ron and a 45 for Chad, and we did the mono and we did the stereo, and then we did the mono and stereo again. I did that with Joe. And Joe tends to call the shots when we work together. We collaborate and we basically agree on everything. But I didn't go back and look at my notes when we did the one for Tone Poet. We just took a fresh, shot at it.
Yeah.
So I couldn't tell you for sure what the differences are.
I'm sure there's someone on the forums that has looked at it under a microscope.
Oh, of course, yeah, with their spectrum analyzers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I get annoyed, but hey, these guys got to have something to do, I guess.
Well, yeah, the bottom line, it's the music that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I just want it to sound good, and you've done a fantastic job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you put me in kind of a quandary because you got the classic series come out, and it's like, man, should I buy that again? I love Kevin's work.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, well, they put out some stuff on the classic series that kind of tickled me because they were titles that I did originally in the day.
Yeah,
like the stuff that I used to do for Sky High Productions. They put out Donald Byrd, Places and Spaces. I always get those words reversed.
Yeah,
Places and Spaces, I think it was. And then I also did Bobby Humphrey that I had done back in the day.
Oh, so you did the originals? I
did, yeah.
Wow.
On both of those. They were going to do some kind of a little article about that, but it never happened. But yeah. Those guys, the guys from Sky High Productions, Larry and Fonz Meisel and Chuck Davis, were some of my favorite clients ever. Those guys were just a blast to work with. But yeah, people ask what the difference. I'll just explain quickly the difference between the Tone Poets and the Classics. The Tone Poets are done with the deluxe jackets and they're pressed at RTI and they're more expensive. The classic stuff is pressed at Optimal in Germany, which is my favorite plant in Europe. And I think they sound pretty darn good. So
yeah, no, I agree.
But they're at a lower price point,
Yeah, and I'm happy that Blue Note decided to do that because I'd rather see the music accessible. And I mean, I love the deluxe versions, but I think the classic War Horses you know, make it affordable to some high school kid that's just getting into vinyl.
Yeah, I got one of those in the family. Our 17-year-old granddaughter is huge into vinyl, and you won't believe this, but I basically had nothing to do with it. I mean, she's been in the studio, she's watched me cutting records, she thinks that's cool, but I guess some of her friends at school were getting into vinyl, so she ran out and started buying vinyl, and she's mostly been hitting the, you know, the thrift shops and the record stores, you know, used vinyl bins. But she's got a huge collection, and she's getting stuff like Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald, and you know, it's just pleases the heck out of me. You know, it's so.
Oh
fun.
yeah, no, it's like rediscovering a lost art, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all this jazz is really coming more into vogue, at least from what I can tell. But you know,
I think you're right.
You know, just really getting into music in the '90s. I mean, jazz was like, okay, it's there, but I mean, there wasn't really any big reissues in terms of CDs. I mean, Rudy Van Gelder is reissues, but they weren't on the forefront of the marketing.
Right. No, I'm glad to see jazz is making a comeback. You know.
Yeah.
Especially since I've launched a jazz label. But
well, yeah, no kidding. And I was going to ask you about that because I do have your new disc.
Oh, you got it.
Well, I haven't gotten it yet. I have it on order, so I'm waiting for it to come in.
Okay, yeah, so they're back ordered. We sold out the first 1,250 in 1 week, which absolutely blew my mind. I thought the record would sell okay, and we did 1,250 to start, and I thought, yeah, that'll last a couple of months, 3 months, you know. So got the second run on order.
No, it's your name.
And I had to order more jackets to do a third. Sorry, I interrupted.
Faith in you, Kevin.
What's that?
People have faith in you. They know
I guess so. I certainly appreciate that.
So I'm curious. How did you connect with Kirsten? How did you get introduced to her?
Oh, well, that's an interesting story. I actually met her through her husband, Dan Frankenberger, who's I had been friends with, and I met her when they were dating, and she mentioned that she, you know, was a jazz sax player. I was like, oh, that's cool. And she showed me a couple of links on YouTube, and I was floored with what I heard. I mean, she has a version, if you can search it on YouTube, of Naima, you know, the classic Coltrane piece, yeah. And she just hits it out of the park. And then they've even got 2 or 3 sort of vamp things that she's doing with the drummer, you know, just improvising. And I thought, okay, yeah, I want to work with this woman. I want to. So it was funny because there was a big, you know, several years between that and when I first wanted to do a sound test when I got all the equipment finished. And so Dave Connor, another friend of mine, you know, knows Kirsten, has actually used her on some of his, he's a composer, arranger, pianist. He's wears a lot of hats. And so I was talking with him and said, hey, I want to set up a sound test now that I got the studio and the gear finished, see what we got here. And so I said, you got anybody in mind? And he goes, how about Kirsten Edkins? And I said, oh, wow. You know, I kind of was thinking of her. And he goes, yeah, I've been using her on stuff lately, and I really like, you know, what she's doing. I said, boom. Yeah. So she came in, we did a sound test, and it was just a sound test. We did 4 tracks, and I was so blown away with the way they came out. I went, hey, I guess we'll do the album with her, you know?
Nice. Yeah. And does she have any, I haven't looked at Discogs, but does she have anything else out?
Yeah. She did a CD about 7 years ago, and it's quite good. I like it. I think Bob Shepard produced it. He's kind of her mentor. She's, you know, it's funny. She's not known around the country or around the world, but she's pretty big in the LA scene. She plays with 3 big bands. We saw her with the Bernie Dressel big band he calls it the BBB, Bernie Dressel Band, or Birdie Big Band. That's it. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, she's like the lead sax in that group, and she's amazing. So.
Oh wow. So I'm hoping that we're going to see more of this, more new artists that, you know, we just haven't been exposed to before.
You will. Our second album, I can't really talk about it yet because, for one thing, we don't have the band finalized. But it's a little, it's, you know, it's not one of the old cats, but this guy's pretty well known. I would say even internationally. But yeah, so looking forward to that. That's going to be really fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you're going to do.
Yeah, but we want to do some new people too. So
Yeah, no, it's great. I like the exposure of the new artist.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Oh, Kevin, I was going to ask you something. I was getting in trouble on Discogs the other day, looking around at stuff, and I was looking for a pretty comprehensive Dick Dale and the Deltones LP collection because I had a really good double CD back in the late '90s, and I found one, and I'm looking at it, and I noticed you did the lacquer cutting on it.
Was that
Did
for
Dick?
Sundays?
Yes, it was. Yes,
Yeah,
it was a single collection from '61 to '65.
yeah.
But I was gonna if Dick Dale had any involvement, did he help with that, with the
No,
sound, or?
no. As a matter of fact, I most of the stuff that I do for Sundays is from pre-mastered high-res files that they send me.
Oh,
One of the reviewers was bashing them a few years ago because everything was from CD. Well, that hasn't been the case for at least 6 or 7 years, or maybe even longer. And I'm doing some stuff now from master tapes. They bought Buck Owens' catalog, and I did the International Submarine Band from the original tape, and some things that they bought. But that was actually from digital files, and I didn't have anything to do really with the sound other than just to transfer it to vinyl.
okay. I was curious about that because I read a long time ago that I think one of the first singles he put out was "Let's Go Tripping," and he said the first time he got to hear it on 45, he picked it up off the turntable and smashed it against the wall. It's terrible! Ah, what'd you guys do to it?
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I like his music a lot, but can't claim a whole lot of input to that project.
So I'm curious though with some of the Sunday stuff, which I picked up a number of the ones that you've mastered. So Sundays likes to promote some of the unknown bands of the '60s, some of the more underground types, which
Yeah,
were not recorded as well.
right.
And so with some of those bands, how do you approach that? Trying to make it sound better, bring out more? Do you have a certain approach with things that were not recorded that well to begin with?
As I was saying, most of the stuff that they send me is pre-mastered
Okay,
on digital files,
so
so that they
there's
don't
not much
really,
you can do.
they don't want it messed with. They want it the way they send it to me.
Right.
So what,
So you're at your point, then it's just trying to put it on a disc.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. There's things that get a little on the excessively bright side that I tone down slightly, but we're talking slightly.
Yeah, that's
Is that
important
from the?
that they don't use you for the mastering.
I'm sorry, you were both talking.
Oh,
Michael, what was your comment?
I was asking if it was what the harshness that you had to scale back, was that from going from analog to digital, or the process?
It's probably on the original analog tape most of the time. Yeah. You got to remember that a lot of that stuff from the '60s was EQ'd to sound good on radio. I mean, so they really cranked the mid and the top. And Sundays tends to kind of keep it that way. I tend to tone things down a little bit when they're that excessive, because my philosophy has always been to make it sound as pleasing as possible on a really good system without, taking the life out of it. And it's not always easy.
No, I was just going to say it's disappointing that they don't just use you for mastering, but I guess that's probably a budget decision on their end.
Probably they have a couple of mastering guys that they really like, and it's fine.
That's a good way of putting it. It's fine.
I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. So I'm curious along those lines. So I was excited to see that Joe and Blue Note put out Coltrane, the Coltrane set on CD.
Yeah, and SACD.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I think, isn't it a dual disc?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I am curious if they might go down the route of trying to do Tone Poets on CD.
I don't think so. I don't think so. That was an exception because it's such a huge record. And that's the only one that we've done DSD files for SACD on so far. And I remember asking him because I thought, I might have to buy another digital recorder so I can run simultaneous DSD and high res, because they always want high res for download and streaming. So we run a simultaneous digital audiophile for those.
Yeah. Secretly, I'm running out of real estate here for vinyl.
I'm hearing that from people. That's bad news. Sounds like it's time to weed out a little bit.
Yeah. I'm getting to that point. I mean, I won't be weeding out the Tone Poets or the Music Matter stuff for sure.
That's nice to hear.
But yeah, it's, trying to think down the road. It'd be nice if, there'd be a good CD copy, but, maybe we
Right.
can plug Joe the next time.
I'll ask. One funny thing is when my record sold out, which is only the first shipment. It's not like it's out of print forever. They started going for $260 on Discogs, or at least somebody was trying to sell them for that.
Wow.
And I thought somebody's going to be really, upset when the second press run comes out.
I got to tell you, you shouldn't be surprised. It's your
No,
reputation.
I guess not. I mentioned on a podcast, I don't know, 6 months ago, that the coolest version of Dark Side of the Moon was the one that Doug Sachs and I did, and it was pressed at RTI, because those are rare. They just did a handful of them, and suddenly there was one. But suddenly there was one on Discogs it was on eBay for $2,000. I don't know if he sold it, but
we got to stay here for a minute, because I had to bring this prop. So, was that the first time you had worked with Doug Sachs? How did that come about?
Okay, that was in the transition point where he was moving from Hollywood to Ojai, which is about 70 miles north, and he decided that the record was dead and he wasn't going to move the disc cutting equipment up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, he didn't have a disc cutting system functional. So he approached me and said, would you be interested in collaborating with me on this? And I said, sure. And he goes, I want to use my own tube tape machine, and I want to use my own equalizer, but we can, use your your solid state cutting electronics, my Class A system. And so I said, yeah, sure. And so that was the first time we ever worked together. I mean, I'd known him for years and we talked a lot, but yeah, so that was very fun. And we had like 3 cutting engineers on that, which was kind of crazy. Arnie Acosta, who had worked for Doug, came up, and he was actually making the EQ changes, and I think Doug was making the level changes, and I was running the lathe. And
well, that, given how iconic the album is, I mean that's one of those, I would assume for you would have been like a dream project, like working the Beatles, which I know you would love to do if you ever had the opportunity. But yeah,
sure.
It's not often those type of projects come along.
Right. Now that's pretty high up on the list. That was really a fun project to be involved in, and I love the record. And I had the record. And
it's one of those iconic ones. But
exactly,
I do have another question for you.
Okay.
So you did the Cisco version of this,
right?
Cisco version. I'm curious, did you? And you may not be able to say, and that's okay. Did you have the master tapes when you did that one?
Universal had the master tapes, and we had to make a tape copy to cut from. Okay. But I don't know I guess you haven't heard this story, but I ran the tape backwards, which it's a trick that a lot of people don't know. I mean, not when I cut it, but when we made the transfer of the tape that we cut it from, and it makes a difference sonically in the copy. The copy sounds much more like the master if you run it backwards. And then we had a really good, clean, pressing to compare it to, which was Bernie cutting, originally. And so we actually just tried to match it to that.
Okay.
But I was really pleased with the way it came out.
Yeah, because
by the way, on your Tales of the Dead Wax, you have the lead out grooves for that record and the other record you discussed in the same thing reversed. Check that out.
I need to redo that whole series.
Yeah, I was gonna. That's how I originally wanted to contact you and just say, by the way, because you asked about Mr. Record and Dr. Groove. That was a joke thing that I started doing with Robert Pincus, because he said I want to have my name in the lead out. And I said okay. He goes, but I'm going to use Mr. Record. And I said, okay, well, if you're Mr. Record, I'm Dr. Groove. So, so that's how that came about. But I think you had that for the other title, whatever, maybe it was Fleetwood Mac or something. Anyway, no biggie.
Yeah, no, long term, I totally want to redo that. And I really want to reach out to some of these people to, get their take on it and just redo the series completely. But I'm honored that you caught it because I put it out there. I didn't think anyone would watch them.
I liked your reviews. I watched them all, and not just the stuff that I was mastering. I always thought your stuff was really really good.
Yeah, and I know I got several things wrong that I need to go back and correct. But yeah, you're trying to. I didn't know how to contact anyone, and so you're trying to scour the internet for information, and sometimes the internet is not the best source of information.
That's true.
You get things wrong.
Right.
Kevin, that brings up a question I had regarding the dead wax, because I think if I remember correctly, you said you were doing replacement lacquers originally at Artisan for Columbia.
I did. Yes.
Columbia.
That was my
lot
foot in
of
the door.
A lot of Columbia records will have like a 1A or 1D, or whatever.
Right.
And I've seen some that have 2A, 2B, whatever. And I've seen recently, I forgot what album it was. It was a 3A or 3B.
Okay.
So I was just curious what the not the lettering, but the numbering. What was the difference between the numbers?
Yeah, I'll give you the whole rundown on that. Okay, when you first cut a record for Columbia in the day, Sony now, of course, you would cut 6 sets of lacquers: 1A, 1B, 1A, 1C and D, and 1E and F. A and B went to Santa Maria. C and D went to Terre Haute, Indiana, and E and F went to Pittman, New Jersey. That was what that lettering meant. That's the first mastering of it. When it was remastered, then it would change to 2A, and then remastered again 3A. But then, but what really kind of confused things is on the first mastering, say one of those plants blew a lacquer or whatever, then they would go to GHIJ, on with a 1 because it was still from the original. By the time they got to 2, that usually meant that it was from an EQ copy.
Okay, I was wondering. And 3, that baffled me. I was, where'd that 3 come from?
Well, it wouldn't probably be any different than 2. It probably just meant that it was later down the road, Now, they would also change the numbering if they decided to substitute a mix, which would sometimes happen. The record be out on the market and say the single, they didn't know what the single was going to be. They'd put out the single and it was huge. They might decide to put the remixed single version back into the LP and they call it repurposing it. And so that would change the numbering too. So it was a little wacky sometimes.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. Right?
Along those same lines, are there any other companies that had numbering schemes that were kind of unique when you were cutting?
Yeah, but I don't remember the specifics of them. Capitol had their own system. I think it was kind of the big 3 in those days: Capitol and Columbia and, well, Warner. Yeah, Warner didn't get too crazy. They used like RE1, RE2 for recuts. And they used the Columbia plants, which is kind of interesting. I think, at least at the time that I was cutting for them in the early 70s. Capitol had their own.
I did not know that because I had seen that inscription on different Warner albums, the RE1, and I didn't know what that was for. So that's for a recut,
right? Which could just mean a replacement lacquer, and it could be again a new mix inserted. They didn't really differentiate.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it was like the probably about 75 or so, that Warner Brothers, it looks like they switched over to Capitol. They were having their stuff cut like at the Capitol mastering agent or facilities.
Well,
you start seeing.
It depends. It depends on the producer and engineer, of the recording. If you're talking about stuff like Fleetwood Mac Rumors, my buddy Ken Perry cut that at Capitol, but it was a Warner title. But that was just because that's where the engineer, Ken Calais, wanted to cut. He liked Ken, and so he went over Ken Clay and Ken Perry. Forgot about that. Anyway, so Ken went over to Ken to get that one cut. He said he told me.
I didn't mean lacquer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I got it wrong. It wasn't the lacquer cutting; it was the pressing. They had Columbia. They used Columbia, but in the mid-70s they used Capitol as their pressing.
I don't think they ever used Capitol's plants. I don't think so. Warner. I don't think so. They mastered it there, but I don't think they used their plants. Now, on a really, really big title, they might have had plants all over the country pressing it. I don't know, because Ken told me that we were just talking about this past week. He said on Rumors he cut 72 sets of lacquers on that. I think it was crazy. 140 sides, 144 sides, or whatever it was.
I guess I'm not surprised given how big the album was.
Exactly. You know, I don't think the biggest album I ever cut, and I couldn't even tell you what it was. I think it was 16 sets of lacquers, 32 sides, which is crazy too, you know. But
wow.
Might have been Billy Joel or something. I don't remember. But.
For a standard album, what was kind of the average number of lacquers you would cut?
Well, it was almost always 6 sets for any of the Columbia titles. And it was usually 4 sets for Warner, or I think Capitol cut 6 sets too, because they had 3 pressing plants, and MCA had their 2 pressing plants, and so it would be, you know, 2 sets of lacquers for that, or 4, sometimes 2 for each plant. Yeah, we were cutting a lot of lacquers back in those days, which is why most of the top mastering facilities had 2 or 3 lathes, you know, running, because you could, you know, get them out a lot faster.
Like Doug, yeah.
Yeah, and we did too at Artisan. We had 3 lathes at Artisan.
So did you, with those ones, did you have a different inscription like Doug did for the mastering lab?
No, we never differentiated.
Okay.
And we never scribed any initials or anything either. Bob didn't like that idea. He wanted it. He considered all of his engineers equal to him, which was an honor. But you know, he didn't see any need for that. So, I didn't start doing that till I went to LRS, or I guess at Kendon. Yeah, Kendon. I put my initials in. I think I only worked there for about 3 months. That was a horrible experience, but anyway.
Yeah, I remember you talking that with Chad just briefly. Yeah. Yeah, I honestly do think it's good to put the initials in.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you need to be recognized for the work that you've done.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I don't even look at it from that aspect. I just look so that I can identify it and say, yes, I did indeed cut that.
Yeah.
Because I've done so many titles. You know, last year I did almost 400 titles, which was just insane. So, you know, I'm probably already forgetting some from January of last year.
Well, to me, it's really kind of unsung art, what you're doing. So one of the video projects that I've been working on, at least kind of in the background, was comparing, you know, mastering and just vinyl to what a colorist does in terms of film, because, you know, the colorist, which is kind of an unsung art too, can bring out different things in, you know, reproducing film. You're highlighting different colors, and I mean it equates exactly to mastering, because you're trying to bring out certain things within the music.
Yeah, I actually use a similar analogy. When people would ask me, well, what is the art of mastering, I'd say it's sort of an equivalent to photo retouching.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So
you know, you're not trying to repaint the painting. You're just trying to enhance things a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Bring out the best of what's there.
Exactly. Remove a few of the minor flaws if you can.
Yeah.
It depends.
Things when you can. Yeah, absolutely. I am curious about the lacquer situation. So I know you're getting your lacquers from Japan.
Everybody is. It's the only plant in the world right now.
Okay.
MDC.
Which, you know, everybody, when we lost was it the Apollo plant?
Yeah.
Everybody was speaking, oh, it's doom and gloom, but, you know, I haven't, you know, as a vinyl consumer, I haven't seen much of an impact at all. So do you know if they've increased their lacquer production? I know that there was discussion about doing that.
I know no stats on that, but they had to have, because there hasn't been a shortage, so to speak,
Yeah.
since that first year. 2020 was, well, you know, I slowed down to a standstill because of, you know, Los Angeles being locked down,
Right.
and the pressing plants were closing around the world, you know, including Europe, you know. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so 2020, even I was having a hard time getting lacquers. 2021, maybe the first half of the year, you know, they were putting me on an allotment, and I can get pretty much what I want now. So things have improved, and the quality they've managed to keep up. It's that's got to be a tough one with the amount that they're shipping, but you know, the Japanese, they really are meticulous folks. So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I know that there have been issues with COVID and shipping, so you haven't been impacted at all with
no,
shipping from
the thing
Japan?
that's been really beautiful about this is there's a company that does the metal processing, electroplating, electroforming, whatever you want to call it, Nipro in Irvine, California, and they are doing all of the importation on the MDCs. So I'm actually buying them from Nipro, and so they're buying them in huge quantities, which probably helps with the shipping. And then they ship them out to all of the different people using them. I think Bernie's got an end run around that because he has a pressing plant, or a mastering facility in Tokyo, you know. So he's probably getting his own, you know, source.
He could ship to himself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But no, thank God for MDC. Thank God for Nipro. Otherwise, we'd all be in, you know what.
Yeah, and I'm curious. Have you heard anything about Apollo trying to get back in and getting financing to?
I kind of think at this point it's not going to happen, but I could be wrong about that. I know they're not going to rebuild in Banning. There's no question about that. I had heard they were talking about maybe in Nevada. You know, one of the principals moved to Las Vegas even before the fire happened. And so, you know, he initially said, well, we're going to rebuild in Nevada, but I haven't heard anything more about it. I talk to him occasionally, so.
Okay.
Kevin, is anybody doing DMM these days?
Only in Europe. There are no facilities left in the US. The last one was, well, other than the Scientologists who are doing their own DMM thing for their stuff only. But yeah, I think GZ in the Czech Republic is doing a lot of DMM. And it was kind of funny because one of the folks at Universal sent out an edict: don't send projects to kevingray because there's a lacquer shortage. This was in early 2020. And so I, you know, they were, in other words, I was supposed to save my lacquers for Tone Poets and Classics. This was the thought. So it wasn't a poke against me, but what happened was Universal started using DMM at GZ because they were pressing there too. So, and most of their stuff was being done from digital files. So it was kind of a no-brainer, but that business has never come back. It's still, you know, they're still doing all of that stuff. Not all of that stuff, but a lot of their stuff at GZ.
But you're basically booked up, right? So
it's been crazy this year. It's so funny because I closed on the 15th of December this past year and didn't reopen again until the 3rd of January. And when I closed on the 15th, I was pretty much caught up. Over that period, I think I had 25 sides come in, like a recut or something, for the odd number. And but by the time that first week was over, I was up to a 60 side backlog, and that's not fun. And so I've been kind of getting caught up on it, but it you know, and here I'm trying to launch a record label at the same time. It was kind of weird timing.
So I'm curious though about your studio, because now you're getting into the overall, you're on the mixing side. Your approach to mixing an album and then mastering it, I'm curious, you know, your approach is there.
Yeah, there's nobody I can blame.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was kind of fun. That was like the first time, I guess, in my entire career that I actually mastered something that I recorded. You know, well, other than way back in the day when I was doing recording schools and churches and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, so it was fun to do that. What I missed what was your specific question?
Yeah, so your approach on just, you know, recording and mixing versus mastering.
Yeah, the point that I need to make about that, which I didn't make clear on some of the early podcast things that I did, is that the studio is basically just for my label. I'm not doing recording for other people too, because I've got enough craziness right now. So our hope is to do, you know, a couple albums a year, you know, for the next few years.
But you're not exactly a novice to it. You had done some direct-to-disc stuff, right? Back in the
but in that case, I was only operating the lathe. Somebody else had to do the mixing. You know, when we did the Victor Feldman album in '77 and the one in '82, that was Alan Sides engineering. In both cases at Whitney Recording Studio, and they had a cutting room adjoining to their studio, and so that's where I would cut the lacquers.
Okay, so hence the importance of the sound check.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, the whole thing was untested. You know, this idea of recording in my living room, as I've mentioned, didn't even occur to me until I saw Rich Capeless's rvglegacy.org site, where he had a drawing of Rudy's, you know, room in Hackensack, and I went, my gosh, that's about the same size as my living room, dining room area. So that's how that came about.
Yeah, that's cool, because I mean, that's exactly what Rudy was doing back in the day.
Right.
And yeah, you know, when you first announced it, I'm like, hey, this is really kind of cool. I'm looking forward to hearing this album, which I can't wait to get.
Yeah, it's just amazing that it worked. I was, you know, as I said in my little 17-minute video that I did, it was amazing because I had the microphone set up and everything. The musicians came in, they started noodling around, and finally it's like, okay, let's do a trial take and see what we got. And so I went back in the control room, opened up the mics, and Dave Connor, the producer, was standing behind me. And the first words out of his mouth were, my gosh, it sounds like a Blue Note. You know, and we were all high-fiving each other. It's like, yes, we succeeded here. So.
Well, hopefully, does this one have a piano on it?
Yes.
Oh, all right. So hopefully you got past the RVG sound for the piano.
I hate to, you know, pat myself on the back, but I think we got a little better piano sound than Rudy. Right. Yes. Although it is a Steinway B, which he also used, and I picked this particular Steinway B because I had looked at 2 or 3 other ones, and it has a mellower tone than, you know, I don't like the sound of the Yamahas that you find in most recording studios today. They're just too freaking bright for me. And I didn't want that sound. And it's funny because this was a used piano. It was built in '66. It was down at a place called Keyboard Concepts in Santa Monica. I saw their listing and I went down, and the salesman, Jack, boy, he had me wrapped around his finger. He sits down at the keyboard and he starts playing Bill Evans, and I'm sitting there with my head just inside the lid. And I turned to my wife and I said, this is our piano. I mean, it's just, yeah.
And you also procured a Hammond B3 too, right?
I already had that.
Okay, you already had it.
I bought that back in around 2007, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, because I love B3. It's a C3 actually, which coincidentally is the actual model that Rudy also had. But
all right.
Yeah, the C3 and the B3 are mechanically the same. They're just a different cabinet.
Yeah. So do you play yourself?
I noodle on everything and play nothing.
Okay.
I used to say, and I think it's true, I know every Beatles riff and not a single song. So yeah, I never had the stick-to-itiveness in that regard to really master an instrument. But
yeah, I hear you. I'm the same way.
Yeah,
I love that was trying to push me through piano.
Yeah, I love B3 though, and when this one came up, it was owned by a client of mine actually, and I had expressed some interest in B3, and he called me up one day and he says, hey, I decided I'm going to unload one of my B3s. My wife's giving me a hard time about having 3 B3s in the living room, and actually it was 2 B3s in an A100 or C3s and an A100. And so he said, it's not working. And I said, that's okay, you know, and what do you want for it? And he goes, just come get it. We'll worry about that later. So my wife and I rented a truck with a lift gate, and it turned out the lift gate was broken, and we practically lost the organ on the lift gate trying to get it in and out. But anyway, it worked out. We got it, and it was about a 2-hour job to fix it. So it had a real simple problem. So I wound up paying for it by doing a bunch of work on his studio gear, because he had a studio also, and so it was a real sweet deal.
Nice. And the microphones, how did you procure those?
I built them from scratch. Yeah.
Okay.
The U47s, the work on that was unbelievable, because I had to have all of the metal work duplicated by a company back in Connecticut, and who does work for some other companies. And they just did a gorgeous job. They're indistinguishable from an original. Anyway, because they apparently had I didn't send it to them, but they had an original to copy it from, or were able to procure it from somebody back there. So they made all the measurements, made all the parts. They're interchangeable with an original.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I bought original capsules, had them re-diaphragmed, bought, you know, the original tubes. I had those. I bought a bunch of stuff that was all Neumann parts and put it all together. And then on the M49s, they had introduced a solid state version of it called the TLM49. I actually took them, gutted them, had to machine out the inside of the microphone to fit all of the tube stuff with the transformers and everything in it. And I've got photographs of that. And then I bought an SM2 stereo microphone, and it required refurbishing. And then I also built 4 AKG C12 clones, but I haven't used those yet for any of the jazz projects. I got to try all of this gear out as far as the mixer and the microphones, because I used to do a lot of recording for the LA Jewish Symphony, and I would actually record their shows live. And so, yeah, Noreen Green is the conductor. She's just a wonderful woman and very supportive. And, you know, I would say, you know, do you mind if I try out some of my gear? She goes, whatever if you think it's all right for it, you know, we'll do it. So, yeah, so I used the 47s. I used the M49s on some of their stuff, and was really happy with the results. And we did a big thing that had choir and orchestra, and I used the 49s on the orchestra, the 47s on the choir, and that came out great. So, yeah, I knew I was kind of home free with the mics. So,
how long ago was this?
It would have been in around 2010. Because the microphones were the very first thing I built, and I think I had the mixer finished by 2010 also. Okay. The tube mixer.
And that was all a custom build, or?
All, yeah, from scratch. Yep, my own design. So yeah, it was a crazy project, and as I've also mentioned, building the tube cutting equipment was really that's what was really complicated and difficult.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't cloning or copying anybody else's system. It was built totally from scratch, and yeah, that was a trick.
Yeah, and so was this all your? I don't think this was all your own design. You had someone helping along with it, right? Or was it your own design?
No, it was my own design. I had a friend, the guy who actually designed all of the solid state gear that I have. He's also pretty into tubes, and he helped me with a couple little snags that I had along the way. Okay. But you know, it was all my design.
Nice. Yeah. Well, whatever it is, I love the sonic signature.
Thank you. Now you're basing that on the high-res files that you've heard, or on the war?
On the record. The war record, the one I know that you said you cut with your.
I did. It was the only time I used it. I actually did another album with it that to this day has not been released because of some contractual problems. But yeah, the war record, that was my own little thing, because I didn't tell anybody for 2 years. You know, it was for Record Store Day 2020, and I thought, I had been moving the two systems back and forth across my room to hook. I have to tear down, put one in, then tear down and put the other one back in. And so normally I would kind of tear down on Thursday night, since that was the last time I would cut, until Monday, put in the tube system, and then I'd be experimenting, test cutting high-res files and stuff to see what I had gotten.
Right.
I was really happy with that. And the tape came in on a Thursday, and I put it up because I remembered the war stuff sounded pretty good, right? And I put the tape up and hit play and went, oh my God, I'm leaving it in until the weekend, until Monday, and I'll cut it Monday morning with the tube system. And
after maybe it was in your previous video, Michael, with Kevin, where you asked about that. I can't remember it, because every time you do an interview, it's like I'm searching YouTube for it, and I remember you had mentioned it in some interview, and so I had to go back and listen to it, and I was like, wow, that was great.
I think Paul, there was some of your questions that I asked him about the tube system
it could have been. Yeah, my memory with these things is terrible.
Yeah, mine too. So yeah, that was fun, and then they started going for like $200 on eBay. After I dropped that, Mike Esposito was saying, I can't keep them in stock anymore, and he goes, I had a bin full of them.
Even with your solid state stuff, I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten, I don't want to offer the tube system to people, because I don't want to start competing with myself, and the whole thing of somebody saying, oh, can we try the tube system, or can we have just the tube cutting electronics, or just the tube console, or this or that. It's like, no, that's stuff for my project, just keep them separate. I did that one test just to see. And
well, yeah, and the labor involved with swapping everything out.
It is. It's a project. It's like set it up for the day, pretty much.
Yeah, and even your solid state stuff, it sounds fantastic anyway. So
thank you.
I would take your stance.
Yeah, Joe is very happy. It's funny. We did a comparison on one Blue Note just as a ref for him to hear at home. And he said it was kind of a flip of the coin. He couldn't really decide which one he liked better. He heard different things in them, which I hear. And he goes, but boy, it's kind of hard to say which one's better. It's like they're different.
Yeah, if you're flipping a coin, you've met perfection.
Thank you. Well, the goal of all of the stuff that I built it wasn't just to make it tube. It was to make it tube that was accurate, as accurate as I could do with tubes. And it's tricky. Tubes are a lot harder to work with for me. I mean, the device is simple, but implementing them is not.
Right.
You're dealing with much higher impedances, and I could get into the technical stuff. But
yeah. Michael, you were going to ask something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't Bernie have a solid state as well as a tube lathe? Does he have both?
Almost. He has a tube cutting system, and he has a tube tape machine, but his console's all solid state.
Okay.
So, yeah. I'm not too thrilled with the sound of Bernie's tube system. I know Mike Hobson made him use it on the classic stuff, and Bernie kind of off the record has said, I don't think it's the best sounding of my two systems. It's kind of underpowered. It's an old Westrex system. And I won't go into it too much because, Bernie's a friend, and I wouldn't do anything to knock anything he does. Yeah. He's a friend. He's in one sense a competitor, but, I really respect Bernie. Yeah. Never say a bad word about him. Or his system.
I do want to say I think Hobson made him use the tube on his Blue Notes too. And honestly, I've compared Bernie's tube cut Blue Notes to what you've done, Music Matters and Tempo. And I'm sorry, I love Bernie, but I prefer the work that you've done on those.
Well, that's why Joe's using me.
Yeah.
Because he likes Bernie. He's friends with Bernie, and he used Bernie on stuff for years. But particularly, he said, I like what you're getting on the Blue Notes better. So
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you had all the runtime with Ron on Music Matters, and then you did the 45 series, Chad, and
you know, it's funny. We just kind of sat down one day and figured out that Joe and I together, because he was saying, I think you've probably cut more Blue Notes than anybody but RVG himself, which is a blow mind. And sure enough, we figured out something like 350 titles.
yeah,
You know, which do I remember half of them? No. but yeah, it's like there's some real standouts, but
yeah, I hear you, because you do so much, and yeah, my memory is poor. It's funny because I was just given a bunch of new hires a tour of the Mission Control Center here, and we have a wall which has all the shuttle assembly missions for the space station. And so we're talking about something like 30 or 40 flights. And they were asking me, well, do you remember these? And I'm like, it's all a blur, because I worked a third of them, and I couldn't, unless there was something big that happened, I couldn't tell you what happened.
I know exactly what you're saying. I'm the same way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Michael, I just got to say something real quick to explain to you that Paul and I found out that we kind of had a connection in this because my dad worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratory all through the 60s, virtually from 60 to 69. So, you know, I went through it with Ranger and Mariner, and, you know, it was a big part of my life as a kid growing up. So when I found out that Paul, you know, was back at Mission Control, it was like, or at Kennedy Space Center, I was like, wow, that's just, that's too cool. Too cool.
That's amazing.
It's a small world.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. Yeah, I am hoping that I will get out that way, though, because we got several different providers out there, and including our big one, which is SpaceX, and they're based out of Hawthorne. So, yeah, I'm hoping I can get a trip out there to at least Hawthorne here within a year. But,
all right.
Yeah, I'm going to
give me as much of a heads up as you can. We'll get you in.
Yeah, I really got to see the studio, and yeah, I'd love to see you on a day when you're cutting a Blue Note.
Oh yeah, we'll set it up. We'll make it happen. We'll make it happen.
I am curious about the analog production days. So you were doing the early Music Matters at the same time you were cutting records for Chad, right?
Yes.
And so I know for the Music Matters, Ron and or Joe were in on every session. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. But with the Chad ones, you were kind of left to your own devices, right?
Well, Hoffman was involved in those up until like 2009.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you had a lot of trades with Steve on, you know, in terms of how they would sound, or?
Well, boy, I kind of let Steve call the shots because he was being hired as the high-paid consultant by Chad. So yeah, I think he actually had more input than I did on well, particularly on the early ones.
Okay.
You know, after 2011, you know, when I opened Coherent, Steve was no longer involved at all.
Okay.
So Ron and I did most of those, and occasionally Joe would come in on them.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so you had a little more of your own take once you went to Coherent.
Right, and even the last year or two up at Acoustic.
All right. The gear at Acoustic, what happened to all the gear at the Acoustic?
It's the same gear, almost. Well, no, it's not. Okay, let me start over from scratch. It's the same cutter head, same solid state Class A cutting electronics, but I didn't have the console and I didn't have the tape machine. So I kind of modified and upgraded a Studer tape machine for Acoustic, and the console was put together from parts. They bought a couple of Sontec equalizers, so we had the stock Sontec equalizers, and I had built up a couple of line amplifiers, but they were not the same as the Class A line amps that were in the old system. Now, when I say the old system, so originally the system that I built with my former partner was for us, and then we sold it to Future Disc in 1986, and they had it up until 2007 7, I guess it was. And then it moved up to acoustic, but it never got installed.
Right.
So when I opened Coherent, I had a lot more room in the room. And so I brought that tape machine in, and we had already disassembled the console. So it was just all of the parts, but it was all one big umbilical. So I was able to sort of plug everything together on the floor and listen to it compared to what I had been cutting with an acoustic. And it was noticeably better because the difference in the tape machine and the console line amplifiers.
Okay.
So I spent almost 2 years out of my tube project re-implementing all of that gear back into the console that is now at Coherent.
Okay.
The same cabinet was there, but it was configured differently. So put all the Class A line amps in, the old Soundtech equalizers that we had modified when it was my system originally, and then the tape machine. And so it was a change, and it was a good, for the better.
Yeah, I've seen photos of the acoustic studio, and yeah, it looked pretty tight.
It was.
Like it didn't have a whole lot of room there.
It was like 14 by 17, I think. My present room is like 17 by 24. It's a big difference,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, when you get a few clients in that room up at Acoustic, it was crowded.
I know. I've seen pictures, and it's like, how are you guys packed in?
When we did Dark Side of the Moon, it was like everybody was bumping into everybody. Chad documented that pretty well. I don't know if that's still up on his website somewhere, but he had a lot of photos from that session with Doug, and I cherish those now with Doug being gone.
He must have taken that down. I have never seen that footage. I'd love.
I'll see if I can find it or a link to it. Sometimes that stuff sort of hidden somewhere on the internet. One day I Googled acoustic mastering, and the whole page came up showing the room up there and everything, and that's been gone for well over a decade. So
yeah.
Kevin, there's video of you working on the mastering the Blade Runner soundtrack. Where was that?
Yes.
When was that done?
That was at Coherent.
Oh, Coherent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did a really funny one. I don't know if you saw it on mastering one of the Barry White albums.
Oh, I love that.
He got this Barry White impersonator to come in. Chad calls me up, and he's like, "How did you get Barry White to come in?" And I said, "It was a neat trick. He's dead."
Didn't have to pay him anything.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a wacky idea. Marshall has a sense of humor. That's all I can say.
Oh man, I loved that the first time I saw that. It was like, oh, it's perfect. It's like Barry White's ghost has come into the studio.
It was so, and that guy was just so much fun. He was just, and he got the biggest kick out of doing it. I mean, he was a Barry White impersonator, but he'd never been in a recording studio. He'd never been in a mastering room. And so I'm saying, yeah, point here and point here, like you're giving me tips. And he's like, oh, okay. And then when he saw the video, he liked it as much as we did.
Did he have a deep baritone voice like Barry did?
His normal speaking voice didn't sound like it, but he could sing like him. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's impressive enough.
Yep.
Oh boy.
Blade Runner is a funny story, just really quickly, because Marshall did not want to put that out, and the Blade Runner fan site, for the movie, kept petitioning him, and he's like, okay, I guess we'll do it, because he didn't think soundtrack albums would sell. I think it was the biggest seller he ever had. I think he started out with something like a couple thousand records, and I think he did 20,000 on that.
Oh man, I have a love affair with that album, because because it never came out on the initial run. They had some.
It did in Europe, I think. There was
orchestra that redid the music, and that was the only way you could kind of get the music. And then it was in the 90s, like 94, where they officially dropped it. And then when I saw that you were cutting it, and I think it was through the YouTube video, I was like, oh, I'm all over that one.
Yeah. No, that was very fun, because I loved that movie, loved the soundtrack, the score. Vangelis is great, and that was a very fun one to be involved with. But it's just funny that Marshall had been so resistant to it, and then they tried it again with Tron, and that bombed like he thought Blade Runner would.
So I'm curious, did Vangelis sign off on the cut of
I
your?
do not know, and I don't know where they found the file on that, but it was a 2488.2 digital file. Now, for all I know, it was upsampled or something, but we compared it to everything we could get our hands on in the way of CDs and things, European pressing, American pressing, blah, 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 blah. It was the best sounding of anything that we heard. So that's what we used.
Yeah, and along those same lines, so when you approach an album, and I know you do this with Joe, you try and get like the original album to
If possible, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's kind of hard when the original, are going for $3,000.
Oh yeah,
there's very few of them out there. But Joe has an extensive library of Blu-rays, originals. So.
Is there anything that Joe's missing?
Not that I'm aware of. I
Okay.
mean, he blows me away in that regard.
Yeah, because I guess Ron Rombach is quite the collector too, and he probably has the entire catalog.
I think he's got the entire catalog. I really do. I mean, yeah. Yeah, who is that guy that he sat at the feet of, the famous collector guy? He was the guy who basically taught Ron everything he knows about procuring records. Leon Levitt, is that his name? Leon.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, he would buy entire collections from disc jockeys and jazz musicians and stuff like that, and then cherry pick through them.
I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah. And Rich Capeless, the guy that has the RVG site, he's got a huge collection of them too.
Yeah. So I'm curious, have you done anything from the 78 era?
Well, yes. We just, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about them because they haven't been announced yet.
Can you talk it in generic terms?
Yes. We did two titles that RVG actually copied to tape from the old parts. I don't know if they were metal parts or pressings, but whatever. They're cleaned up and they sound great. I don't mean digitally cleaned up. I mean, he did it when he transferred it, and we have the original analog tape that he made, and they knocked my socks off, both of them.
Okay. Wow, something to look forward to. I need to save space on my shelf.
Yeah. Yeah. Down the road, they'll be out. Can I talk about it? I did a Monk, and I'm a huge Monk fan.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I think it was originally recorded in 47, and it was out on vinyl back probably in the early 50s or mid 50s. But hearing this record brought me to tears because it was like for hearing Monk for the first time.
Yeah.
It was just an emotional experience because he had already, in 1947, he already had these songs formulated in his head, and then he's recording them 10 years later, but they sounded so fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the old 10-inch days. Yeah. He cut. Well, he was cutting in the 78 era, but yeah, I have a couple of the 10-inch replicas.
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah. Which you did. I don't think you did, but
no.
Yeah. Yeah, they are fantastic. I love them.
Yeah.
I just can't wait to see what you would do with them. I know it's coming down the pipe.
Yep.
Were those the 10-inch LPs or the 78s?
They called them LPs in those days.
Yeah.
10-inch LPs. What made them long play was they were 33 instead of 78. Right? I mean,
yeah. And my theory too is the 78 presses, they needed to keep them around, so they just converted them, right?
That's probably true. I don't know. Yeah, I have so little knowledge of pressing in the 78 era. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and guys, I'm sorry, I gotta duck out here in a minute, but I was about out of quarters anyway in terms of questions.
Yeah, it's been very fun.
I listening to you guys, so
I didn't usurp and ask too many questions that you were going to ask, Mike, but I gotta hop off here shortly.
Oh no, I'm good. I'm gonna have to sign out here pretty soon anyway too. So
Okay.
Yeah. So great talking with you guys. It's very fun.
Yeah, it's great to officially see you on camera and interact with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so when I get around to doing the Tales of the Dead Wax and I kind of revamp it, I'll probably be reaching out to you, Kevin, and we can set something up and do something directly.
Anytime. Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys.
All right. Thanks, Michael, for setting this up.
Yeah.
no problem. Anytime.
All right.
Thanks again, guys.
Yeah.
Take care.
Talk to you later.